Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Today, we forge the strongest possible vessel for truth, to carry it safely through time. We enter episode 11, the metagrammar, the part of Holophase where science learns how to protect truth from human confusion, from memory drift, and even from our own future selves. This chapter is about one surprisingly practical weapon in that protection system: canonical rule forms. The problem sounds technical, but it is painfully ordinary. A rule can be correct, stable, and well tested, and still get destroyed as it travels from mouth to mouth, notebook to notebook, and generation to generation. Not destroyed in nature, of course. Nature does not forget, but destroyed inside civilization, inside the social memory of a community, inside the living chain of teachers and students. Today, you will learn how we stop that. Let's start with a story you can feel. Imagine you inherited a precious recipe from your grandmother. Not a printed cookbook recipe, an oral recipe. She taught it with gestures, glances, and you'll know when it feels right. In her hands, it works perfectly. The bread always rises. The sauce always tastes like home. Then she is gone. You try to recreate it from memory. You write down what you think she said. Add flour until it's enough. Cook until it smells ready. Use a hot oven. Stir slowly. You feel proud because you think you saved it, but your sibling tries it and it fails. Your cousin tries it and it tastes different. Your friend tries it and burns it. Soon the family starts arguing. Someone says, "Grandmother meant this." Someone else says, "No, she meant that." Another says, "I remember she used a different flour." Another says, "No, it was the same flour, but the water was warmer." The recipe becomes a battlefield, not because anyone is evil, but because the container was weak. That is exactly what happens to scientific rules when they are not written in canonical form. A canonical form is the safest container for the same truth. It is not more true. It is not a different law. It is the same constraint, but written in a way that minimizes ambiguity, hidden assumptions, drifting meanings, and accidental bias. Think of canonical form as taking that fragile oral recipe and turning it into a clean, standardized recipe card that anyone can follow anywhere at any time. Because every ingredient is defined, every step is timed, every measurement has units, and every condition is explicit. Same bread, stronger vessel. Now name the enemy this defeats: scholastic degeneration. Scholastic degeneration is what happens when a community spends its energy debating what founders really meant, instead of testing what the world is actually doing. It is when a field turns into commentary on old texts. It is when two schools use the same words but mean different things, so they talk past each other for decades. It is when symbols drift and arguments multiply and reality becomes secondary. Metagrammar refuses that fate. It says, if your rule is real, if it is a constraint on phi, then it must be writable in a form that any competent stranger can interpret the same way, measure the same way, and test the same way. Canonical writing is how we make a rule public, auditable, and survivable. Now, in Holophase, we always anchor back to the triunity, because our writing must reflect how reality is structured. We begin with phi, the holophase field. For audio, say it like phi of position and time. Phi depends on where you are and when you are. From phi, we read the triunity. Omega is the time rate of phi, how fast phi changes with respect to time. Kappa is the space rate of phi, how fast phi changes with respect to position. Nu is the motion readout, the coupling between omega and kappa, the way temporal rhythm and spatial structure together create measurable motion. If you want a picture in your mind, imagine a song. Omega is the beat per second. Kappa is the spacing between notes on the page. Nu is how quickly the melody travels through space, the lived motion created by rhythm plus spacing. Canonical rule forms must respect this triunity. That means a good rule does not secretly hide an omega assumption inside a kappa sentence, or bury a kappa condition inside a nu story, or treat one shadow as more real unless the license explicitly allows it. Let's fill that with another everyday story. Imagine you are giving directions to someone in a new city. You say, "Walk fast and you'll get there soon." It sounds helpful, but it is not canonical. Fast compared to what? Soon compared to what? How far is there? What if the road is blocked? What if it's raining? A canonical direction would say, from this corner, go 200 meters north to the traffic light. Turn right. Walk for 5 minutes at a normal pace. The destination is on the left. It defines the spatial part, the temporal part, and the action. It makes hidden assumptions visible. Science needs that same discipline. So here is the practical definition. A canonical rule form is a standardized expression of a rule chosen to reduce misinterpretation and representation drift by making all dependencies, domains, units, and assumptions explicit, and by making the tri-unity structure, omega, kappa, and nu, transparent. Now, why do symbols drift? Why does meaning corrupt? Because humans are not perfect recorders. We compress, we simplify, we use metaphors, we skip definitions because everyone knows. We reuse symbols because they look familiar. We inherit notation from a different context. We translate across languages. We teach by intuition. And all of that is useful until it becomes the official record. When a messy, context-dependent statement becomes the law, confusion becomes permanent. Canonical form is the cure. Now bring in a crucial holophase discipline. Energy is tally. In holophase, energy is not a magical substance. It is bookkeeping, a ledger that summarizes how phi is changing inside the licensed observation window. It is what you compute, not what you worship. Bad writing creates fake mysteries in bookkeeping. Two groups can measure the same system and get mysterious correction terms simply because their definitions differ. That is not new physics. That is sloppy ledger work. So canonical writing is also canonical accounting. It makes the ledger transferable. Picture two shopkeepers. One keeps a messy notebook. Sometimes he writes money, sometimes he writes sacks of rice, sometimes he writes favors owed, and he calls it all income. At the end, he claims a profit, but no one can audit it. The other uses a clean double-entry ledger. Every entry has a date, a unit, a category, and a cross-check. Both might be honest, but only one record can survive time and scrutiny. A canonical scientific rule is like the double-entry ledger for nature. Now, in the firewall, canonical forms are not a nice suggestion. They are part of licensing. You may discover a rule in any messy form you like. Discovery is allowed to be creative. You can scribble, you can guess, you can prototype. But if you want a broad, high-confidence license, a rule that others may safely build on, you must submit it to canonical refactoring. The firewall acts like a careful editor. It says, show me your rule, and now we will rewrite it so it cannot hide. This refactoring does a few concrete things. First, it replaces ambiguous words with defined quantities. Second, it makes all hidden omega assumptions explicit. Timescales, sampling, stability duration, response delays. Third, It makes all hidden kappa assumptions explicit: spatial domains, boundaries, coordinate choices, resolution limits. Fourth, it makes all hidden nu assumptions explicit: allowable actions, couplings, frame choices, motion readouts. Fifth, it chooses notation and units aligned with agreed standards, so other teams can reproduce without translation wars. Sixth, it writes the rule so its symmetries are visible, because symmetries are part of what makes a rule durable. Now, express the editorial idea with one simple equation spoken as a sentence. We start with your original rule. Call it G original. The firewall applies the canonical transformation. Call it C. Then we produce G canonical equals C of G original. Say it slowly. G canonical equals C of G original. That means the rule after canonicalization is the result of applying a standard rewriting operator to the original statement. It does not change what the world does. It changes how the rule is stated. Now let's make canonical refactoring feel real in your hands. We will take a messy sentence and turn it into a durable rule. Messy sentence. The system is stable. Sounds fine, but it hides everything. Canonical rewrite. For omega between 1 and 10 cycles per second, and for kappa measured over spatial steps no larger than 1 millimeter, the observed stability measure S remains within plus or minus 1% over a duration of 60 seconds under perturbations no larger than a specified amplitude. Do you hear what happened? Nothing mystical. We forced the sentence to confess its time range, its spatial resolution, its measured quantity, its tolerance, its duration, and its conditions. Canonical writing is confession, not poetry. Another messy sentence. The effect grows as you go deeper. Canonical rewrite. Let D be depth measured along the kappa axis from the defined boundary. The measured effect E is a function of depth, E of D. Over the domain D from 0 to 1 meter, E increases monotonically with a slope bounded between stated values. Again, domain, variable, units, boundary, behavior class. And one more. If you push harder, it moves more. Canonical rewrite. Let A be the action amplitude applied within the new action class defined by the apparatus. Let R be the response displacement. For A between A1 and A2, the response R is proportional to A, with proportionality constant K measured under the stated omega sampling and kappa resolution. Now the rule is testable by any team, anywhere. This is why canonical form is the final social firewall. It transforms private insight into public knowledge. Now add a story everyone understands, the story of a legal contract. When people make an agreement, they often speak informally. I'll pay you next month. You can use the car. We'll share the harvest. For friends, this can work until stress arrives. A contract becomes necessary when time passes, memory fades, and stakes rise. A contract is not more true than trust. It is a stronger container for the same agreement. Canonical form is the contract of science. It is not cynicism. It is protection. Now talk about representation drift, because this phrase is the silent killer. Representation drift means the rule stays the same in spirit, but its written form slowly changes as it is copied, summarized, retaught, and simplified. A minus sign becomes a plus. A boundary condition is forgotten. A term is dropped for simplicity. A symbol is redefined without warning. Units are assumed. Over decades, the rule becomes a different creature and no one notices because everyone inherited the drifted version. You have seen this in everyday life. A story is told at a wedding. It is funny. Then it is told again at another wedding. Some details change. After 10 weddings, it is a different story, and people swear it is the original. Science cannot afford that. So canonical forms are built to resist drift. They do it by including explicit definitions and by being tied to operational measurement. When your words are tied to how you measure omega, kappa, and nu, drift becomes obvious because the measurements won't match. Now I will give you the key holophase guideline. Every symbol in your rule must point to a measurement recipe. If you cannot say how you would measure it in a licensed window, the symbol is not yet allowed into a high-confidence rule. That is how the firewall keeps the rule anchored in reality, not imagination. Now we arrive at the main prediction of canonical rule forms, and it is practical. Prediction. If a rule is truly about phi, if it is truly a constraint of the world, then two independent teams, starting from the same empirical content, will converge when they rewrite the rule into the same canonical form. Their final canonical expressions will match, and their predictions will align. Any previous disagreement caused by what we meant will shrink or vanish, because meanings are pinned down. In plain language, clarity makes agreement possible. Now comes the falsification condition, subtle but profound. If during the attempt to write the rule canonically, the rule's predictive content changes in a material way, if you must add new unlicensed terms, or if the rule collapses into something trivial, or if it splits into incompatible versions, then the original rule was not a robust law of phi. It was representation dependent. Its apparent truth depended on the messy way it was written, not on the world. Canonical rewriting exposes fragility. Now ground this in a story from everyday governance, because humans feel stakes there. Imagine a village council that manages water rights. For generations, they pass down a proverb. The one who tends the channel may drink first, but the river belongs to all. It sounds wise. It might even work, as long as everyone shares the same background understanding. But then people move. New families arrive. Drought comes. A new canal is built. Arguments erupt. What does tends mean? For how long? What counts as first? Which channel is the channel? Does repairing a wall count as tending? What about using a pump? The proverb becomes ambiguous, and ambiguity becomes conflict. A canonical reformulation would keep the wisdom but make it operational. It would define the spatial domain, the exact channel segment marked by surveyed points. That's the kappa boundary. It would define the time term. Rights and responsibilities apply for a fixed season, renewed at review. That's the omega boundary. It would define the actions, allowable maintenance activities, allowable withdrawals, maximum rates, emergency protocols. That's the new action space. And then it would state the invariant constraint. The net water level across the system, measured over the season, must remain within safe bounds, and withdrawals must satisfy the allocation rule. Same wisdom, stronger vessel. In science, we do the same thing with laws of nature. Now list the most common sins that canonical form eliminates. Sin 1. Undefined terms like stable, large, small, fast, slow, strong, weak, near, far. In discovery talk, they are fine. In license rules, they are poison unless defined. Sin 2. Hidden time assumptions. Omega hidden in the shadows. A rule says this stays constant, but never says for how long, under what sampling, under what perturbations. Canonical form forces the omega range. Sin 3. Hidden space assumptions. Kappa hidden in the shadows. A rule says this happens at the boundary, but never defines boundary, coordinate frame, or resolution. Canonical form forces the kappa domain. Sin 4. Hidden coupling assumptions. Nu hidden in the shadows. A rule says if you push, it moves, but never states which actions count as pushes, what degrees of freedom exist, what constraints apply. Canonical form forces the action space. Sin 5. Representation bias. A rule accidentally privileges one coordinate system, one pipeline, or one cultural metaphor. Canonical form seeks coordinate clean expression, so the rule belongs to phi, not tradition. Sin 6. Unit ambiguity. A symbol is written without units, and later people argue whether it was meters or centimeters. Canonical form nails units. Sin 7. Scope creep. People apply the rule outside the tested domain because the boundary was never written. Canonical form writes boundaries into the rule itself. When you remove these sins, you create a rule that can travel safely. Now, here is a simple 7-step canonicalization recipe you can repeat. Step 1. Name every symbol out loud. If you cannot name it simply, you don't yet own it. Step 2. Define each symbol operationally. How would you measure it? In a license window? Step 3. State the domain. Where in space, where in time, and under what actions does this rule apply? Step 4. State the units. Seconds, meters, cycles, whatever is appropriate. Step 5. Expose assumptions. Noise, sampling, boundary conditions, and background context. Step 6. Write the symmetry. What transformations leave the rule unchanged? And are those transformations actually licensed by data? Step 7. Attach the scope label. Valid for these omega ranges, these kappa scales, these new action classes, within these uncertainties. If you do this, you do not merely write a rule, you publish a tool. Now one more everyday image, because images stick. Think of packaging medicine. If you have a powerful medicine, but you leave it in an unmarked jar, children can drink it, adults can overdose, and someone can confuse it with sugar. The medicine might save lives in the doctor's hand, but harm in the wrong setting. Canonical form is like proper pharmaceutical packaging. Label, dosage, contraindications, batch number, expiration date, and instructions. Same substance, safer world. Now we return to licensing, because Holophase always ends with governance. If a rule submits cleanly to canonical formulation, if it can be written in a stable canonical form that makes omega, kappa, and new assumptions explicit, that defines variables and units, that preserves predictive content, that reveals symmetries, then it earns a stronger license. The firewall marks it, stable and canonically expressed. It is now safe to build upon. If a rule resists canonical formulation, if it stays muddy or fractures into rival versions when clarified, then the firewall marks it, provisional and formally fragile. It may still be useful locally, but it cannot be foundation stone, and it cannot be used in high-stakes contexts without warnings. This is not punishment, it is honesty. It is the difference between a tool you can hand to a stranger and a tool that only works in the inventor's hands. Now I will end with a quiet truth. Most civilizations do not fail because they lack smart people. They fail because they cannot preserve clarity. They lose the ability to transfer constraints without corruption. Canonical forms are how a civilization remembers without mythologizing. So take this into your bones. Canonical rule forms are the archival craft of science. They are the disciplined rewriting of a discovered constraint into a standardized vessel designed to survive misunderstanding. Canonical form does not change what phi does. It changes what humans cannot mess up. And one last warning. Canonical does not mean prettiest. A canonical form can be long. It can feel boring. That is fine. Its job is not to impress. Its job is to survive. Beauty is sometimes a danger. A beautiful sentence invites people to repeat it like poetry, even when they do not understand it. A beautiful equation invites people to memorize it like a charm, even when they forget its domain. Canonical form is the opposite of a charm. It is a tool with a manual attached. So a canonical rule always comes with three companions. First companion, a dictionary. Every symbol has a definition, and every definition points to a measurement recipe. You must be able to say, when I say omega, I mean the time rate of phi, measured like this, with this sampling, in this window. Second companion, a boundary card. It says where the rule is allowed to live, valid for these omega ranges, these kappa scales, these new actions. If you step outside, you must say so. Third companion, a version stamp. Because our expression evolves, if the community updates the canonical form, it must be traceable. Version 1 defined here, version 2 clarified here. Then old papers remain readable without guessing. Before we close, picture one more scene. A school classroom, 50 years from now. A teacher opens a worn textbook and reads a rule that you wrote today. The teacher has never met you. The teacher does not know your voice, your emphasis, or your hidden context. The students are even further away. They will repeat the rule in exams, in labs, and in future papers. If your rule was written loosely, each new retelling will shave off meaning the way a river smooths a stone. In a few decades, people will swear the blurred version was the original. Now add translation. Someone converts your work into Dawi, Pashto, Arabic, English, and Chinese. A single ambiguous word, like rate, gradient, or coherence, can fracture into several meanings across languages. Canonical form protects against that by tying every term to a measurement recipe. If the translator is unsure, they can follow the recipe. The recipe is the anchor, not the poetry. So when you feel tempted to write, "This is obvious," stop. Write the definition. When you feel tempted to say approximately, state the tolerance and uncertainty. When you feel tempted to say it usually holds, state the domain where it holds and the edge where it fails. That is how you respect the listener, the reader, and the future. Because in Holophase, honesty is not harsh. It is simply kindness, always. That is why we write like engineers, but we speak like humans, together. No guessing needed. This may sound like bureaucracy, but it is mercy. It prevents future students from wasting years decoding what an author might have intended. It prevents new teams from reinventing definitions. It prevents the rise of priesthoods whose only power is interpretation. And now you can feel why this belongs in metagrammar, not ordinary physics. Physics tells you what happens. Metagrammar tells you how to prevent your description of what happens from rotting. So, when you write your next rule, imagine you are sending it to a stranger 100 years from now. They will not know your culture, your shortcuts, or your private assumptions. They will only have your words. Canonical form is writing with that stranger in mind. That stranger must be able to rebuild your experiment, compute your quantities, and challenge your claim without needing your personality. If they can do that, your rule has become a real public object. If they cannot, your rule is still trapped in you. The firewall's job is to liberate it, so truth can travel. This is how a civilization turns insight into durable shared knowledge. Salam and peace be upon you.